probably the largest misconception about emotional intelligence is it means we get more sensitive. And that's not what it means at all. We get stuck in the first word and we forget about the second word, emotional intelligence. So it's getting smarter about our emotions. That's what we're doing.
Welcome to the Happy Engineer podcast, the place where we help engineers like you to build your career, balance your life, and be happy. I'm Zach White, former engineer turned lifestyle engineering coach, and your host for the journey to the career and life that you desire. Hey, I believe that you shouldn't have to sacrifice your life to reach your full potential at work. And what we're going to bring you in these conversations and interviews are the strategies, the tools, and the mindsets that are going to allow you to experience both success at work and success at home. Hey, we do the best we can to keep this free from advertisements. Of course, I can't control what YouTube may throw up, but do us a favor and share this podcast with anybody who you think may like it. And don't forget to click the bell and subscribe and get notifications to our YouTube channel and for upcoming releases of the Happy Engineer podcast. I would love your feedback, and even more than that, love your story. Share with us how these strategies and tools are working for you. Would love to be in touch with you. Connect with us on social media. Find me at Oasis of Courage on Instagram, Facebook, or Zach White on LinkedIn. It's an absolute pleasure to serve you. Now let's do this. Happy engineers, welcome back. I am pumped for this conversation with Teresa Quinlan. Teresa, thank you so much for making time to be with us today. Your big smile and the energy you bring, it's contagious. I love it. So thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for asking me to come, Zach. It's a pleasure.
So I have to share the thing that right at the beginning made me say I have to have Teresa on the show. Was when I heard Jeff, who's a mutual friend of ours, say that you do dance parties in your Zoom calls. And so I am a former dancer. Many of our listeners know that I have a ballroom and Latin dance background, and I have always wanted to do dance parties on Zoom calls. So please tell me, Teresa, what's going on with the dance parties?
So when I run my challenges, of course, it's about emotional well-being, and music and dancing and movement and freedom to be authentic and yourself is a big part of our state of wellness and achieving our state of wellness. And so I infuse it as a means of encouraging people to show up fully as they are. And you can see across the Zoom squares the mix of that level of comfort. Some people simply get straight in it with me because we're on our chairs. Some people will stand up, not many. I'm usually standing and busting a move. Others just sort of bounce their head along, and others stare blankly at the screen. And as weeks kind of go by, you see people loosen up just a little bit. So it's both an expression of who I am into the space, so I'm authentic and they can see that, and it's an invitation for them to be authentic as well.
This may seem like such a strange place to sit for a while, but I actually am really intrigued by it, and I would love for you to share more around how this connects to emotional intelligence and what does it unlock for us as individuals when we begin to feel confident and free and authentic in that way. So the engineer in me pre-dancer would have said, this is hokey, this is silly, this has nothing to do with the success I want in life. Like, I don't belong here, I don't want to do this. What would be your response to that to help somebody understand, like, it's not really about the dancing. What is it about? Why is it important?
You're right. It's not about the dancing. It's about authenticity. So when we think about trust, whether trust for others, because generally when we think of trust, we think of it in the context of trusting other people. But the first place we have to start with trust is, do I trust myself? And when we consider our emotional states, many of them appear because we're in some sort of disruption around trusting ourselves, whether we're trusting our logic, we're trusting our emotions, we're trusting our intuition. So we're either going to be questioning our IQ, our EQ, or the maybe more intangible, intuitive nature that is really hard for us to put tangibility around. So if we just put it in the context of our logic, which is a lot easier for people to put it in the context of, being authentic is one of these pillars around self-trust. Rigorous logic in using our intellect is another pillar around self-trust, and even empathy, having compassion for ourselves, is another pillar. And this is kind of a dynamic trilogy in the work by Francis Frey around how trust is actually created within organizations. But I like to look at it from the lens of what about trust for ourselves? So if we excavate into the layers of our authenticity, we're really looking at some key pillars in emotional intelligence, and one of them, which is the foundation, is our emotional self-awareness. So when we're aware of why we are experiencing an emotion and how we create the experience of that emotion, then we start to pick apart and unlock who we actually are, minus the package that was created by other people.
Wow.
Is that too deep for the beginning?
I love it. Teresa, I can't cannonball with us into the deep end. Keep going. I love where this track is taking us, please.
So for example, I grew up being called a girl. So it was a label. And with that comes a package. And I am a girl. But with that came associations of meaning, like I should have long hair and wear dresses and sit with my legs crossed and like to play with dolls. And then there was this whole package that was created from the external world. And that was very much in conflict with how I felt. So I preferred playing sports, and I preferred being by myself, and I preferred my hair short. I mean, anytime my mom left the house and I got my hands on the scissors, terrible things happened. So I preferred all of these things that were outside the package that other people were creating for me. And there was this conflict between individuality, authenticity, and community belonging. And that's a very difficult emotional space for us to wrestle with, especially when we're young. And so we learn quite quickly how to either float in one direction or the other and the consequences of that. And hopefully at some point in our life, we learn how to balance the two.
This core question, do I trust myself? That's a really interesting one. I'd love it if you'd unpack for us, maybe how do we become more aware of how that question and the way we answer it might impact our behaviors or our life. I can kind of imagine some people saying, well, of course I implicitly always trust myself. What do you mean? Why would I not trust myself? Maybe there's other people listening to this who would say, oh yeah, I really connect with that. I never trust myself. But how do we become more in tune with, are we trusting ourselves, and what happens when we don't? Like, what's going on in that space?
Mm-hmm. So there's two skills within emotional intelligence. One is independence, and that's our ability to be autonomous, self-directed, complete our daily tasks, decision-making on our own. And then interpersonal relationships is how we create community and are part of a community. Sometimes these skills can be seen, as you describe them, like opposite ends of a polarity. But in essence, we need to use these skills all of the time. And in some instances throughout our day, we need to operate as an independent. We need to operate autonomously. We have to make decisions on our own. This might seem silly, but just follow me through the course of the day. And I'm just going to do the morning time. Who decides when you get up in the morning? Like, that's a decision Sometimes we make independently and sometimes we don't. Sometimes our community influences our decision that we make there. And in that decision-making point, am I in balance, meaning I'm doing for me and my community equally, and so I'm in balance? Or am I doing for my community to the sacrifice of myself? And now all of a sudden, emotionally, I might feel a little off kilter. Or am I doing it only for me to the sacrifice of my community? Again, to which I might feel a little emotionally off kiltered. Now, how do I know when I'm emotionally out of whack? Self-awareness is it's a practice skill. And the way we practice that is by paying attention to how we're feeling. Now, you and I grew up in different families in different countries and with different rules and different everything. But something that is probably very similar between us is that we do know when we're on and we know when we're off. And if it is as simple as saying, I'm on, so I'm balanced, I'm in wellness, I'm off, I'm not those things, then we can start to say, well, what kind of off? So which emotions am I experiencing? Why am I experiencing those kinds of things? And does it have to do with this tug of war between independence, autonomy, and community and belonging? Am I in that space? Am I self-sacrificing for others? If I am, it might be okay in the moment. I'm willing to make the sacrifice, but then I'm going to return to balance. Am I choosing myself over others? Yes, I am right now. Is it to the detriment of other people? No, it isn't. No one's not even going to notice that I chose cereal instead of toast for breakfast. Like, it's not a big deal. So when we're thinking about our capacity to trust ourselves, it is that capacity to know which one am I doing when I'm in balance, when I'm out of balance, and why. So it's the full exploration of, when I'm going to make a decision independently, do I trust that I can make that decision objectively and for myself and the greater good equally? When I'm in those situations where I need to ask other people, it isn't because I don't trust myself. It's because I want opinions of other people to assist in my decision making, because I need to consider the community in this moment, because the impact of my decision is to the community. So I shouldn't be making it alone. I should be asking other people their thoughts, their feelings, their perspectives, their objectives. Hopefully, my sense of independence is strong enough that I won't let my personal opinion about something really objective from someone else sway me or dissuade me to making the decision that needs to be made. And we can see this pop up in our professional lives all the time.
There's 100 things I want to ask you right now. This is really interesting. First, just a quick point of clarity around the example. And I love how just clean and simple waking up in the morning as a decision plays out in this example of, is it me independently or how is my community influencing it? Can you just explain the distinction between, let's say my spouse asks me, honey, would you be willing to wake up at 5 a.m. tomorrow for XYZ reason? Versus maybe I have a puppy who wakes me up at 3 a.m. by barking and something totally external. Would you put those both in that category of, maybe the puppy is bad for, because it's not a human community, but nonetheless, it could be a baby instead. Are those the same in sense of being on that side versus the independent side, or how would you distinguish those things?
They're both community-based. One simply gave you a heads up so you could choose in advance, and the other you're responding to in the moment. The skill set's the same.
The same. And so
Yeah.
it's not so much, was it under control or out of control, so much as just simply the decision paradigm that's happening, whether I'm conscious of it or not in that moment. And the challenge we're asking is becoming conscious of that balance. Am I getting that close to correct?
Yeah. And I would even say both examples, my wife asks me, my puppy inadvertently, both are outside of our control. I can't control what my spouse asks me or doesn't ask me. I can control my
Yes.
response to it.
Yes.
Right?
No, okay,
My end
perfect.
of the bargain, I can control. The context of your examples are really great context to be able to recognize nuances maybe within the skills and
Yeah.
how they apply.
So then while we're in the deep end, I'm going to attempt to stay there. And I hope this question makes sense. Feel free to take it any direction you want, Teresa. There's a sense of implied values in this idea of balance, that the independent aspect of the decision and the community aspect of the decision deserve some sort of mutual consideration. And if someone exclusively decides on the basis of independence, what is good for me and what I want, that will ultimately be to their detriment in this wellness balance we're talking about. But I think some people might say, yeah, but isn't that just my decision? If I want to do that and that's right for me, isn't that okay? And so I'm curious, would you argue, or is there evidence that, look, to be healthy emotionally, we must consider both? Or is it really up to me to decide how I want to weigh the scale and I can find emotional wellness regardless?
There, the second part. The latter part of your, is it this or is it that? So when we start to explore things like meaning, fulfillment, a rich, enjoyable, like self-actualizing, and people start to ask, what is, I'm going to roll my eyes here, work-life balance. What does life balance mean to you? So let's stop making work something separate from life. It's part of. And so what is life balance? Yeah, cheers, cheers.
3 cheers. Yeah, I agree.
What is life balance? So oftentimes we'll see this picture of the scales of justice sometimes, or some sort of scale with a fulcrum in the middle, and we've got things on one side and things on the other side. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the teeter-totter to stay balanced. And so we make all of the circles on it the exact same size so it can balance. And then we label the circles: work, family, community, me, volunteer, health, whatever's important to you. We label them. They're all the same size. They're all neatly in a row. And then we all try to fit in the box of what that picture looks like. And we find out that we can't do it. But I'm trying to follow the prescription for balance and wellness and happiness and a life well lived. And so-and-so wrote a book about it and drew this picture. And now I'm trying to achieve this picture. And we wonder why we can't achieve the picture. It's because everyone's picture looks different. And it's up to us to figure out what's in the picture. So I did this exercise around self-actualization, which as an EQ skill is our willingness to consistently pursue what is meaningful and fulfilling for us, that creates that richness and enjoyability in our life. And basically have people draw a circle in the middle of a page and write the word me in it, and assume for a moment they are the center of their universe. Generally, we all are anyways. And then draw spokes out from the circle with little circles on the end of them. And in those circles, start to populate, what is a rich and enjoyable life to you? What needs to be part of your life in order for it to be rich and enjoyable, in order for there to be meaning and fulfillment? And it is amazing every single time I do this exercise that people look at me and go, is this right? They show me their picture. Is this right? Only if everything you wrote down is meaningful to you. But if you have a circle that you labeled because it's supposed to be there according to someone else, then it's not quote unquote right. And you'll consistently be unbalanced because you're dedicating time, energy, and resources to something that's not meaningful to you.
Yes.
And when we do that, we steal time from the other things that are. So this individuality of drawing my own circle and circles is me thinking about what is it for me? Because when I show up in a community as an individual who is self-actualized, then chances are community is a bubble. It's one of my circles. Other people will be included in that, and I will be a contributor to their wellness. So when it's time for me to be off balance on purpose, I'll know how to do it, to how much I can do it, before I have to return to balance and my own wellness. So I'll know when to steal time from one thing to give to another, and I'll know when to return that to its balance. And in work, we're not in control of that sometimes, right? The boss says, hey, I need you to work late. Hey, I need to overload you with more projects, more time, more requests. And we go, oh God, work. And we think we have no control over it. So we have a response control over it. And we have a community that we can vent to that helps us to get it off of our head. And we have a manager that we can talk to and say, hey, look, I could steal time from this, this, and that for the next 4 days. But after that, I can't give you any more than that. I have to return to balance. But that's only if we know ourselves well enough as an individual, as part of the community, to be able to assert our needs to somebody else and stand firm to them.
That line of conversation with a manager that you just articulated is one I think a lot of engineering leaders listening to would say, wow, I wish I had the courage and the ability to go hold that boundary or assert that priority in my life in an intentional way. That's really powerful. Teresa, can we zoom out for just a moment? I took us right into the deep end. And here we're talking about some really important EQ words and skills, self-actualization and authenticity and wellness in general. If I was going to just come back to the big picture and say, Teresa, could you make a case for the engineer and me and for the engineering leader listening around why EQ as a skill set and as an area of focus is so important? I think it's kind of assumed anymore. Like, yeah, it's a thing. Everybody knows it's a thing. We all need to work on it. It's really important. But sometimes I don't know that we actually understand that. We just want to not look silly in front of our other colleagues. So can you make a case for us? What is it really about emotional intelligence and this body of work that's so important?
One of the nicest things around the pandemic for emotional intelligence was it kind of ended the argument that our emotions impact performance. Because there was this argument about it. No, it doesn't. Not really. Like, come on. And then the pandemic hit, and so many things for so many people changed all at once. And we were all over the place with our emotions. And we noticed very quickly that our performance suffered. Now, there's a few scientific things. One is when we are emotional, we lose our minds. That's why we have the phrase, I lost my mind. And this could be that we were elated and excited. It's not just these quote unquote negative emotions that we label like I was furious and I lost my mind. Some people are like, I was so excited, I lost my mind. And the fun that comes out of that statement is that it's so true that when we are emotionally hijacked, we have a very difficult time accessing our intellect, a rational, logical brain, and we do things that don't make any sense in the moment. So that's one. That's why EQ is so important. We have to be able to be aware of and manage our emotions so we can access our intellect when we need it. So in the case of the pandemic, how did we see that? Like mass quantities of purchasing toilet paper was not rational nor logical. Yes. Because at some point in the evolution of human beings, and we don't have to go that far back, there was no such thing as toilet paper, and we survived fine. And if our survival was dependent upon toilet paper, we were in trouble. But the heightened state of panic, anxiety, stress made people decision-wise make very irrational, illogical decisions. Now, the second part is around threshold. So you and I go to engineering school and learn all the things we need to know about engineering, and we come out and we learn how to do our job. What we see in the workplace related to this is we see individuals who rub others the wrong way. And when they've been rubbed the wrong way, they don't stick around to find out how smart you are. Mm-hmm. They don't want to work with you. They don't want you on their team. And so all of a sudden, that person stops getting the high profile projects. If you're listening and you happen to stop getting the high profile projects, it might be because you're rubbing people the wrong way. And this is your EQ. So it's 60, it accounts for 67% of performance.
67%.
It's a big number.
It's a huge number.
Yeah.
It's a huge number. So I'd love to sit on these two aspects for a moment and talk about where would someone begin in building their EQ on these two domains. So going back to the idea of emotional hijacking, losing my mind.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I've pointed at or had a beef with, this is my soapbox, is when I hear people describe that reality, the truth of that, but it's sometimes portrayed in a way that makes us feel like victims to our own emotional hijacking. Like there's nothing you can do but become more aware and attempt to manage it. Count to 10 before you talk, or try to inject some little thing to just, when you do flare up and get extremely angry, don't make that really bad decision. Sometimes it's like, well, what about the ways to minimize or mitigate that flare up in the first place? How do I build a level of new transformational mastery in my EQ? And is that even possible? Would you address that a little bit? Like, how do we move forward or improve in that area? Is it really just at the level of when it happens, have a strategy? Or is there something that can be done at a more base level in our EQ to potentially avoid those hijacking moments in the first place?
So both. And there are things we do in the moment that we need to practice because that's how our emotional intelligence or our emotional quotient actually grows. And then there are proactive things we do to heighten our awareness and put pen to paper to start figuring out what needs to be different about our perspective, our point of view, our mindset. So when we think proactively, it's a number of these things that we kind of put in the self-care bucket, like sleep right, exercise, eat well, get the body to function well and healthy. And that starts to mitigate some of the emotional stressors that occur within our body that we are reactive to. And then we want to layer on the heavy hitters, like gratitude, journaling, self-discovery, time invested to excavate who am I and how is it that I create my experiences? So when Jim, who's a trigger for me, comes in the room and says that thing that he says that makes me lose my mind, why do I keep blaming Jim? It's a really interesting question to get under, because that's when we throw our hands up and go, because Jim made me angry. Everybody, you heard it here with Zach White and Teresa Quinlan. Nobody makes you angry, just like nobody makes you happy. Nobody makes you sad. You create the emotional experience. So you have to own it and claim it. And as soon as you claim responsibility for, oh, I'm creating it, that means you can change it. Yes. And I don't know about you, but as soon as I hear, like, not that I have responsibility, but I have the power or control, or the agency exists within me, then I'm free. So within it lies my freedom from being this emotional disruption, from being a puppet on the strings that when Jim does this thing, I'm just going to do that thing. And no, so almost like a joke, count to 10. It's impulse control is a skill in emotional intelligence, and it's extremely powerful because it helps us to take the needle off the record. Our habits, our default habits and our reactions is like dropping a needle on the record and letting it play the song. We just let the song play. We have to learn how to pick the needle up off the record and stop the song from playing. Whatever that takes, taking a deep breath, turning around in a circle, counting to 10. In the moment, those strategies are really powerful. What gets in our way is we fail to execute on them. We give ourselves egoic reasons not to.
Yes.
And that's part of the pen to paper work, is identifying your ego, what it sounds like, how it shows up, and how it sabotages you into letting the needle drop and just play that song one more time.
I have to repeat what you said a moment ago because it's so important, and it's a source of a lot of controversial, challenging conversations in my coaching with engineers. that you are both responsible for and able to change your emotions and the way that you feel when Jim says that thing he always says. And I'll even take it one step further, that if when Jim always says it and you can predict that Jim will always say it, you absolutely have a responsibility and obligation to change yourself, not Jim. You can predict it's going to happen again, but that is such an important point, and we don't have enough time today to unpack all of the how to create that change. But engineer listening, just please take that to heart. And if you need help with this, reach out to Teresa, reach out to me. We'll talk more. But I want to take that. So, okay, we have this ability and responsibility to manage these heightened states. And I love this metaphor of taking the needle off the record as a picture. And what I'm hearing you say is, honestly, it's me getting in my own way and my ego that prevents me from taking action on these simple needle off the record strategies.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It really is that simple. So then this second dimension, I love that you talked about it, because I think it's so important for engineers to recognize that your IQ has the threshold. Yes, you can go get a PhD and really push the needle all the way, different needle, this isn't the same record, sorry, push the envelope all the way out to the edge of that area of knowledge and truly become the world's greatest in one domain. But there's only so many jobs for the world's one greatest person in that space. So generally speaking, we all approach that upper bound to where, in the eyes of our organization and the value they need us to create, one person's intelligence versus another is hardly distinguishable for value creation, and it's EQ that drives the difference. Would you just list for us, Teresa, what are the main EQ differentiators? You outlined a couple examples earlier, but where would an engineer want to focus first in being able to take the IQ they have, but actually deploy it for value into their work life or even their personal life, but career focus maybe to begin? What are those differentiators?
In my professional opinion, it would be empathy. So I'm going to make the distinction here. Empathy not as a personality trait, because we know empaths. We know empaths that are deep, feeling, sensitive individuals. Empathy and emotional intelligence is a skill we use, not a personality trait we develop. So for everyone listening that's like, oh my God, I'm not going to cry in the corner, hold hands, sing kumbaya, good, because that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Every engineer listening was just about to hit stop until so
yeah,
keep going.
exactly.
Perfect.
That's probably the largest misconception about emotional intelligence, is it means we get more sensitive. And that's not what it means at all. We get stuck in the first word and we forget about the second word, emotional intelligence. So it's getting smarter about our emotions. That's what we're doing. And so that's why it's developable skills. So empathy is our ability and willingness to understand someone else's perspective. So when we have high levels of IQ, sometimes we get stuck in our own intellect. I know is a really common phrase. And when I say I know, guess how many people also want to be listening? Zero. So when we use empathy, it's actually putting what we know aside just for a minute and making room beside us, not above us or below us, but beside us, for other people to share how they're looking at the problem. So essentially, empathy is a demonstration of our curiosity. How would you approach this problem? What formula would you use? Whose methodology would you want to tackle it with? What would it look like at the end result for you? What would you want the client to see, the customer to see, the user to see? Whatever. We just kind of dive in and go, help me see the picture that's in your head. And when we use empathy to the nth degree, what ends up happening is, instead of us taking the first thing they said and filling in what we think that's going to mean, which we're never right about anyways, because it's just our point of view, when we finally get all the words out of their head and see the full picture, oftentimes what they're painting looks kind of similar to what we're going to paint anyways, but they just have a couple of different approaches here and there, and the end result we're aiming for is quite similar. Or they've got something you're like, where did you get that red spot in yours? I've never seen that before. That's really interesting. And I wonder how we can combine your differences and uniqueness in mine and create something that's actually very new, because independently we can't, because our IQ threshold, but together we can create something different, because we'll have overlaps that look the same, and then we'll have these bright spots that are very different from each other. So that skill in itself is exceptionally powerful to, one, stop rubbing people the wrong way, two, stop leading with our intellect, because usually that's what rubs people the wrong way, and three, allow our independence to shine after we allow our community to shine. So when I follow with assertiveness, that person has felt so seen and heard by my use of empathy that they're now willing to listen to what my point of view is. When I start with assertiveness, if they're not emotionally intelligent, then they won't be listening to me. They'll be preparing their defense argument.
Yes, yes. I hope the engineer listening backs this up a minute and listens to that again, because that was incredible. And would you, Teresa, just give us one specific example of what it looks like for empathy to show up in the workplace in a real scenario? Because I love how you described empathy doesn't mean when someone else is crying that I must cry with them in the corner, or that I become an empath as the emotional trait. It's this intelligence around it. And so could you just give us one real world on the court example of empathy at work?
Okay, so we're coming to a project meeting together and we're discussing ideas of how we think it should go. And Jim, let's just use Jim because he's been great
Good
so
old
far.
Jim.
Good old Jim comes in and he shares an idea, and I feel myself go, oh, bloody Jim, not again with that idea. So I notice myself start to rise in temperature, just call it that.
Yeah.
And I'm ready with my tongue. My mother used to call it my sass, but I'm ready to say something back that's just gonna slap him in the face. I'm gonna put him in his place. Instead of doing that, the words, "Tell me more, Jim," come out of your mouth. That is empathy in action. 3 little words. Tell me more.
I love the simplicity of that. Easy to apply. And this word temperature, I think, is a really beautiful picture, because that is what the experience of heightened emotion. I like to tell my clients one way to help build some awareness is to think of emotion, energy in motion. It has this real biological element to it. And some people might refer to vibrations in the body and these things. I don't want to get too woo-woo with it, but the point of, you do feel some temperature rising, and to take that as a trigger for a new behavior, tell me more, that is empathy in action. I think that's a really beautiful, concise example. So thank you for that. What do you think is the reason then? Maybe it's just ego. It could be a simple answer, but why is it so hard for us to actually succeed at that particular example? If someone hears them like, yeah, people have told me that before, but I still keep telling Jim off. I keep going for the kill, so to speak. What is it that is so difficult about making that shift for humans?
Believing that I won't be worth less, which is a whole other conversation, Zach.
We're going to need another episode. Oh, this is that's such a powerful answer. Keep going.
Yeah. So what often will get in our way when we're going to reserve our intellect is I attach a lot of my worthiness to my intellect, and through so little fault of our own, because when we came out of the womb, it became the thing for a lot of us that was praised, measured, stack ranked, given gold stars for, you name it. And so many of us are very deeply connected to how smart we are, equaling how worthy we are. And so if we can start to dismantle that, then using empathy will be super easy.
Teresa, this hits home for me so much, because academics and intellect and performance in school was the premier value in my household, and well intended. My mom was a teacher, my grandma was a teacher. I was able to get good grades. And so for my mom, it was, hey, you can get straight A's, therefore go get them. And all of the rewards and recognition in the home was built around that. And I'm super thankful that I learned a lot. I was extremely smart. I was valedictorian. I got great grades. I, went to Purdue, all these great things. But it absolutely built that circuitry you just were talking about, that my ability to be smarter than or solve the problem through intelligence was my only strategy for success. And no doubt, I feel even to this day that sting of unworthiness try to take over my heart and my state. The quality of my life is impacted in a big way when I feel like I'm not smart enough to do something. And so that really resonates. Thanks for challenging us with that. We're going to need a whole nother conversation, Teresa, because there's so many places to go, but I feel like we've really put a lot on people's hearts and minds. At least for me, I'm in that place. So let's land the plane. And I always finish in the same place. And I'm really excited to hear where you'll take us with this, that great engineering and great coaching. And you are an amazing coach. So I know this will resonate for you, that questions lead and answers follow. And if we ask poor questions, we're going to get poor answers. And just to pay attention to the questions we ask ourselves. So for the engineering leader who's been listening to this conversation, who wants to experience that success at work, but that happiness and fulfillment and meaning we've talked about, what would be the best question you would lead them with today?
For me, it often comes back to helping unlock within each individual, what is the definition? So when someone wants to achieve life balance and they ask, how do I achieve life balance? My first question is, what's your definition of life balance? And many times they don't know. So that's the first exploration. And that means shedding a lot of layers that other people have put on us that we're walking around with. And sometimes we're unaware that we're walking around with these layers. And so we have to get rid of them. And some of them were like, no, actually, I really like this one. Excellent. So keep it because that resonates with you. I want to be happier. I want to be more fulfilled. Well, what's your definition of happiness? I don't know. Let's work on that first, because once you're really clear and decisive of what your definition is, of what it means to you, what it looks like to you, feels like to you, smells like to you, tastes like to you, experiences like to you, once you're clear on what that is, then you can start things like visualizing it. And visualization is the most powerful tool for changing programming. But if you're not clear on what it means to you and what its definition is to you, then what ends up happening is we end up chasing the obscure, neatly packaged things that are already out there, and we never reach it.
It's beautiful. And I'm really encouraged by that. And I think any engineer listening will be, that we like definitions, we like precision. And yet we often do not apply that exact principle into these areas of our life where we feel unsatisfied. We do it at work all day long. Somebody uses a word, a term in a meeting that we don't have mutual agreement on its definition, and we'll debate about it for days. And then we have this area of our life that is incredibly important, and we don't spend the energy to get clear on the definition. So Teresa, thank you for that. I know people are going to want to follow up with you and just discover more of your incredible work as, a coach, as a leader, and your specialty around EQ and everything that you've done. Teresa, where can people go to find out more or connect with you if they want to do that?
So my website is a really good one-stop shop for that. And I have a formula. It's IQ plus EQ equals TQ. So my website is iqeqtq.com. And LinkedIn is a great place to follow me to get snippets of content Monday through Friday, video format usually, because I like speaking to people as if I'm speaking to a friend and dishing out like, this is EQ and this is EI and this is how you use it. Try it today. Have fun with it. So those are two places to follow me.
I love it. And I can testify you will not regret following Teresa on LinkedIn. Her content is phenomenal. I learn from it every time I have an opportunity to watch one of your videos. I love it. So thank you again so much for making time for us today and creating space to share your wisdom with our listeners. And I hope we can do this again sometime soon.
Me too. Part 2 would be fantastic. Thanks, Zach.
Hello, my friend. Zach White here again, and I wanted to let you know that's all we've got for this episode of the Happy Engineer podcast. Thank you so much for investing your time with me today. It is an absolute pleasure to be able to bring you this content. Just as a reminder, it would be amazing if you would subscribe and share this episode with any other engineers you know who may benefit from this. And if you're like me, I hope that you'll take some notes and, more importantly, take action. In our audio version of the podcast on Apple Podcasts and any place that you go to find podcasts, there's a little more content from me about this episode in the debrief. If you really want to hear about how to put this into action, I'd encourage you to go grab that. But thank you for joining us for the video version of our interview today. And again, can't thank you enough for helping us to get the word out about the Happy Engineer podcast and what we're doing. If there's any way we can serve you, would love to do that. Go find us at oasisofcourage.com or reach out to me on social media at Oasis of Courage. And don't forget again to subscribe and click the bell to have notifications of upcoming releases of new episodes of the podcast. As always, I want to leave you with this. If you stay in your comfort zone, you're not going to grow. So let's crush comfort, create courage, and let's do this.